Happiness and joy are two different things. Joy is knowing God. Happiness is having all your desires and wants met. Is having everything go your way. And the reality is that's not the way God is. God isn't interested in your happiness. He's never been about making you happy. He's interested in something a lot more than happiness, and that's joy. And joy comes out of a relationship. And so we've talked about finding joy in the chaotic world, and we've talked about finding joy in the trenches. You know, the first week we talked about how when you're going through the struggles and the hardships, that you can find joy even in the midst of craziness, in the midst of insanity. Tonight we're going to talk about being a star quality Christian. So let me ask you a question. Do you have star quality? Are you a star? I was surfing the internet and I discovered there are numerous online quizzes to help answer that question. You know, are you a star? And the quiz I took asked things like, what sort of music do you listen to? And can you take constructive criticism? What do you like to do late at night? And I know I blew that question because I go to bed early. I'm getting old, and so I don't. Apparently, real stars stay up and party or something like that, and I've never been good at staying up and partying. I clearly don't qualify for the world's version of star quality. Not that I was really worried about it. I was amused when my quiz returned the following result. You're not a star. You're average. Average can be a good thing. Your friends will like you, and you're more of a people person. Just remember to keep your dreams alive. I thought that was a lot to conclude on the basis of 10 questions that took maybe 20 seconds to answer. But I never thought I was a star, at least not in the way the world defines the term. Any famous person in the world of entertainment or sports. A recent survey revealed that the 19 most popular stars on Twitter, the list started with Chris Brown at number 19 and ended with Lady Gaga at number 1. In between were luminaries like Eminem, Brazilian soccer superstar Kaká, President Obama, Oprah, Katy Perry, Justin Bieber, on and on. And that does clarify the matter somewhat. Few of us move in that rarefied atmosphere. I do not envy them, nor do I begrudge them their moment in the spotlight. But it did make me stop and think. Do we really want to be stars from the world's point of view? Or do we want to be stars from God's point of view? Who are the heavenly celebrities who shine like stars? For Christians, this is a familiar image. Jesus himself said, "You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Matthew 5:14 and 16. Paul said the same thing in Philippians 2:15. Let's go ahead and read Philippians 2:12 through 18. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his own pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. Paul's telling the Philippians that they were stars. How do you start star quality Christians? Well, I think these verses answer that question for you. Star quality Christians have made 5 important commitments. First off, we need to learn to do our part. So then, my dear friends, just as you've always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now even more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Notice Paul's first exhortation, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, many people have been confused by this statement because they read it as if it said, work out for your salvation. That's not what it's saying. Okay? That, of course, is impossible, since Paul himself clearly says in Ephesians 2:8-9 that we are saved by grace through faith and not of works. So Paul's not telling us you need to work out being saved. It would contradict everything he said elsewhere. So what is he telling us there? Well, what he's telling us is that salvation begins when you accept Jesus, but it never ends. Your first step as a believer, when you first got saved, that's the beginning of it. True salvation affects every aspect of your life. If salvation makes no difference in the way you live, what's the point in being saved? If it doesn't change the way you talk and think and make big decisions, if it doesn't change your worldview and the way you evaluate your own career, what's the point in being saved at all? A salvation that doesn't change you isn't really a salvation. It's hardly worth having at all. Working out your salvation means to radically change the way you view God's will. See, we get it in our heads that God's will is to do what we want to do. Well, God, this is what I think you should have me do. This is my talents, these are my skills. What do you think? And God doesn't work that way. God often takes us and puts us in situations where you don't feel like you're prepared. Do you know why? Because He's not interested in you doing it. God does not give man-sized assignments. God gives God-sized assignments, which means you can't do them. If God, all you're getting is man-sized assignments, things that you can do in your own strength and your own power and your own ability, you're not getting assignments from God. You're not plugging into the real power of God. Let me put it to you this way. When I was at Del Rio Community Church, many, many years ago, okay, I've been the pastor here for almost 11 years, okay, so, and I was at Del Rio for 27. I'm old. I'm really old, okay, but I was pastor there for 20, I guess it was 24 years, not 27, but anyway, yes, I've been in ministry almost 40 years. Thank you so much for pointing that out. But when I was at Del Rio, we were really struggling. And we got down and we said, you know what, God, we want to do what you called us to do. We're not going to do this. We're not going to plan our budget based on what you want, what we want. We're not going to do it on what's worked in the past. We're going to pray through every line of the budget, and we're going to decide our budget is based on where we feel like you are headed us. And so we began to pray and to seek God. And it was amazing to watch the transformation, because we no longer worried so much about what we had done in the past or what we thought we could do by working really hard. We said, God, if you want this, you prepare the way. And it's amazing the things God can accomplish when we get out of the way. Okay? Many of us put conditions on our obedience. We're willing to obey if God will keep us safe and healthy, if He will guarantee us a good job, a happy family, no problems, a long life, and a good retirement. Let me say plainly that the God of the Bible makes no such deals with His children. The call of Christ is always the same. Come, follow me. We are called to follow Christ and to leave all the other details in His hands. Take up your cross and follow me, I heard the Master say. Okay? I got news for you folks. God is not interested in you being able to do it in your own. He's not looking for a deal from you. Well, Mike, I really like what you're doing there. I would like to recruit you to be on my team. And it doesn't work that way. Jesus died for me on the cross. He did everything I needed to be saved. I didn't have to do a thing. I just had to accept the gift. So if I'm saved through faith, working out my salvation means that I need to learn to work to surrender control. First, basically what I'm telling you is if you're going to be the stars from God's point of view, you need to be willing to do God's will, no strings attached. No strings. There was a young man on his way to China, and he met with he was a missionary on the boat on his way back over. This is years ago. No planes, no trains. This was a ship, a sailing ship that was going across the ocean to China to take missionaries over there. And he got into an argument with some guy on the deck, and they were discussing this theological matter. And the older missionary looked at him and he says, well, get your Bible and let's look this up, because I would rather go back from what Scripture says. And the guy says, well, I'm sorry, but they packed my Bible in a trunk and it's in the hold and I can't get to it until we land. And the guy looked at him and says, how can you be willing to do God's will if you're not going to know what it is? If you don't and commune with God daily and read your word, you might as well go home and run a bank. Because what you're going to do requires you to be plugged in. And so when God calls us, we need to say, yes, God, I am willing. I'm going. I'm doing this right now. Not, well, God, I got to think about it. Does it fit into my schedule? You know, I got to ask my dog and my cat, and I got to work it out with my parents. And I'm sorry. God says, go, I go. I can't argue with him. I can't decide, well, I'm going to do this because I feel like I can do it. It's not my strength that matters. It's never been my strength that matters. It's never been my ability. God did not call me because I'm such a star quality person. God did not get a deal with me. He got my sin for his Savior. He changed me and is changing me and will continue to change me. And all of that starts when I say, yes, God, I am yours. Do with me as you will. Back in Isaiah, God came to call Isaiah, and he was saying, who can we send to send my message? And Isaiah pops up and says, here am I, Lord, send me. And that should be our response. Here am I, Lord, send me. I'm going to do what you call me to do, and there's no strings attached. I'm not holding back. I'm not continuing. I am totally and utterly committed. And I'm going to do it no matter what. This is what you call me to do, and this is what I'm going to follow you. So, if you want to be a star, you got to do your part by surrendering your will and letting God's will take control. That's hard for us, folks. I already know that. You and I both know that. We all want to be in charge. I mean, that's the oldest sin in the world. Right? That's the sin of Adam and Eve, because they wanted to be God. They wanted to call the shots. They weren't interested in listening to God. They were going to do it. And Satan tempted them and tricked them. And the temptation was, if you eat of this fruit, you'll be like God. And that's what they wanted. So, if you're going to be a star from God's point of view, you start when you accept Christ, but that's only the beginning. And you continually work out your salvation by surrender and submission. See, we don't like those words. We don't like the idea that I'm giving up control, but control is really an illusion. You can't do it. You can't work it out yourself. You can't save yourself. Number 2, if I'm going to be a star in God's point of view, I need to learn to utterly depend on him. For it is God who is working in you, enabling you both to desire and to work out his good purpose. I have news for you, folks. When God saves you, he gives you the desire to work out his good purpose. He changes your desires. Everybody tells me, well, you know, if I become a Christian, I'm getting all this stuff I really enjoy doing. No, you know what? I get to do everything I want to do as a believer. I get to do all the evil I want. The thing is, I don't want to do evil no more. God has changed my desires. He changes you, and as he molds you and changes you, your desires become his. You begin to take on his desires, and eventually you let God work it out in you, and he enables you to desire and to work out his good purpose. We've already noted the phrase, for it is God who is working in you, in verse 13. This gives the perfect balance. We do our part because God does his part first. God always makes the first move. Salvation is God's work first to last. You know, we've used Henry Blackaby's material for a long time. It's one of the foundational documents in this, the foundational teachings in this church, that God is already at work. God is already working. We didn't decide it. God brought us here. God enabled us. God created us. God matured us. God developed us. God works with us. And as God is at working, he invites us to join him. So God's at work. We learn to depend on him because we can't do it ourselves. It's perfectly fine to say, I found the Lord, as long as you remember the Lord found you first. The verse also tells us that God gives both the will and the ability to do what he commands. He changes our want to, and then he provides the power to obey it. Okay. One final observation. God intends to give us all that we need in every situation so that we can do his will. He will enable us by his Spirit so that we will be able to desire his will, and then we will do it. I find this thought very encouraging. I keep going back, and you've heard this story before, and I'm not going to go into all the details again, but I keep going back to Wilkerson and God's call on him. Little country farm boy. I want you to go to New York City, and I want you to lead gang members to Jesus. I want you to start an inner city church. Wilkerson had never been in a city. He was a country farm boy from out in the Midwest. He had no idea what he was doing. But God called. So he went. He depended on God. And then God gave him the desire to work out his good purpose. Wilkerson, God used. One of the young men that God used him to lead to the Lord was a gang member, one of the highest ranking members of one of the gangs. His name was Nicky Cruz. Wasn't just a gang member. He was the leader of the gang in New York. I think he was a Crip. And one of the biggest, most nastiest gangs in all of America. The Crips and the Bloods. He was a Crip. I may have my information wrong. I can't remember whether he was a Blood or a Crip. I just remember that he was the leader of that gang. And Wilkerson, God used him to lead him to Jesus. On the day Nicky got saved, he had gone there with the intention of killing Wilkerson because he was bringing too many people into Christ and out of the gang. And he said he got down there and he ended up going down front. Fell on his face. Wilkerson said he sat there and talked with him. The guy had a gun in his belt. He was there to kill Wilkerson. He said, and he told him what he was there for. And he says, I want your Jesus. I need your Jesus. Wilkerson didn't have a clue one. That's what he was doing. But God did. God had a call and God sent him. And it wasn't Wilkerson's abilities. It wasn't his dynamics. It wasn't his education. He went because God called him. All there was to it. God said, this is what I want you to do. Okay, fine, I'll go. I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, just picture that. God, often we look at what we lack and conclude that our problems are greater than our potential. Often we look at, we look at the constraints of time and energy or money or people or material resources, and we think, oh man, we can't do this. And God again and again puts us in positions where we're unable to do anything without his help. And then he steps in and does it. Let me tell you something, folks. When I was at Del Rio, we almost went under. We were talking about replacing the pastor because we were bankrupt. We weren't making our bills. We didn't know how we were going to pay anything. We had 8 people trying to pay $12,000 a month mortgage. Try that. It don't work real well. Not when we were mostly blue-collar workers. And quite a few of us were out of work. And we began to pray, and we felt like God wanted us there. And God provided. I still remember the day we got a call from our mother church. Hey, can you come? We've been given the money to pay off our mortgage, and we're going to have a note burning ceremony after church today, and we'd like to have a banquet, and since we planted you, we'd like you to come join us, and we'd like you to take up an offering, and try to pay off some of your debt too, and so you can come celebrate with us. And I remember my pastor looking and like, I don't know what we're doing. And he says, we're in the hole. We can't pay the bills. We can't pay the mortgage. The Southern Baptist Convention is talking about taking back the property and giving it to somebody else because they're the ones that gave us the money to start the church in the first place. And we were ready to close the doors. And we sat there at that table and they kept talking about all the stuff that God had blessed them. And then when their pastor got up and he says, we want you to know, we planted your church and we failed in our responsibilities when we planted that church. We didn't support you. We abandoned you. We cut you off. We saddled you with a $104,000 debt, and 4 of you there. The pastor, his family, myself, and that's pretty much it. All the people that had gone over there to help start the church went back to the mother church. We went to nothing. And we spent a long time struggling with how to pay the bills. And we sat there and he talked about that, and he says, and we want you to know that we're paying off your mortgage. We shouldn't have saddled you with that debt. And so what we're going to do is, your debt is, you no longer owe a penny. We're writing a check to the Southern Baptist Convention right now to pay off your mortgage. We couldn't have done that. But God did all that. God did all that. It wasn't us. That was God. We could have complained about, well, we don't know how we're going to do this. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough money. We don't have this. We don't have that. Yeah, we could have complained about it. But that wouldn't have solved anything. But God said, I have other plans. What God demands, He supplies. You know, the churches I've grown up in, the church I grew up in high school, we had this policy. We didn't start a program unless God provided the people to lead it. We figured that if God wanted this program to work, that He would provide the resources to make it run. And we didn't need arguments, we didn't need complaining, we just basically got on our knees and said, God, what do you want us to do? Our budget was based on what God wanted us to do, not on what we want to do. I believe that that's the way God intends His church to run. Totally in faith. What God demands, He supplies. And the truth comes to the heart of the gospel itself. When God demands full payment for sin, He supplied His Son, whose death fully paid the debt we owe. But the truth doesn't apply only to our past experience of forgiveness. It describes how God deals with His children day by day. What we need, He supplies. He gives us the inner strength to do His will, and then He makes a way so that we can do it. Yes, we have to do the part that He's called us, but we can never do our part unless God did His first. And His part involves giving us both the desire and whatever else we need to fulfill His purpose for us. Let us then set forth every day with all the energy we have to do God's will, knowing that we already have whatever we need to do His will that day. And if we need anything else along the way, He's already got it taken care of. We don't need to work for it. We don't need to complain about it. We don't need to argue about it. We don't need to try to guilt people into it. We can say, God, this is what you called us to do, and we're going to continue to do it. And if this is where if you want to change directions, you need to guide us to the right place. We want to see what you're doing and join you in your invitation to doing it. Number 3, I will not complain. Verse 14, do everything without grumbling and arguing. Star quality Christians make a third commitment. To the Greek word, arguing might be better translated as murmuring. It's a word whose sound conveys the meaning. Like the English word hiss or hum, it has the idea of muttering under your breath. Do you understand that complaining is an attack on God's sovereignty? Every time you complain about your circumstances, you're really saying, if I were God, I would do it this way. God's obviously messed up. The complainer has forgotten the first rule of the spiritual life. He's God, and we're not. Over the years, I've seen a lot of different places. I can tell you that rarely have I heard any complaints, even from those facing persistent opposition to the preaching of the gospel. I recall here about a man who saw great success in preaching the gospel in southern Nigeria. Thousands of tribal people came to Christ. Later, he was transferred to the largely Muslim region of northern Nigeria, where, after many years of hard labor, he had only gathered a few converts. Some man, same gospel message, yet different results, but no complaints. He who said, I was told early in the ministry to focus on Christ, not on the hardness of the Muslim religion. It is a matter of focus, isn't it? When we look at what determines what we see, if we focus on our problems, they will fill our minds until we see nothing else. No wonder we complain and mutter and murmur under our breath. When we focus on the Lord and His goodness, we see our problems in the light of eternity. God doesn't work on our timetable. Once we grasp that, we will not complain against the Lord. I will be different to make a difference, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God, who are faultless in a crooked and perverted generation, among whom you shine like stars in the world. Hold firmly the message of life. With this commitment, we come to the heart of our text. Paul uses 3 key words to describe how we should live. He said we should live blameless. That's above reproach. No serious accusation can stick. We should be pure, high quality, unmixed alloy. What you see is what you get. Fit to be offered to God like a lamb without spot or blemish. We can make an impact on the world by lives that are visibly, observably, measurably, and noticeably and obviously different from the people around us. We are to be different to make a difference. Our values set us apart from the surrounding culture. Why is it so important that we be straight arrows in our lifestyle? Because we live in a crooked and perverted generation. The word crooked comes from the Greek word scoliosis, from which we get the English word scoliosis, a curvature of the spine. The word perverted is much stronger and in essence means crooked by choice. Some people are messed up because they don't know any better, and others live that way by choice. Every Christian must be heard as we face cultural crisis. Recent events have made it clear that neutrality is impossible. There's no place to hide on the issues that divide our nation. Sooner or later, we'll all have to take a stand, even when it may cost us greatly. I believe that for us to ever hope to ever convince others, we must first show to the world what God's design looks like. It will not be perfect because it involves imperfect people. But God's grace can make us blameless and pure for a world that desperately needs us. You can't argue until the cows come home, and it will not make a difference. How do you show someone that they're using a crooked stick? You lay a straight one next to it. Your stick is crooked. No, it's not. Yes, it is. I'm telling you it's crooked. I'm telling you it's not. You don't get very far that way. But let us simply and quietly resolve to live out our faith in the most beautiful way possible, by showing forth the glories of Christ in a truly Christian home. We lay down our lives for each other, where the children are raised to know and love the Lord, where the home is marked with joy, freedom, commitment, holiness, and hospitality. Such lifestyles can change a neighborhood, and you can change a city. Change a city, and you can change a state. Change a state, and you can change a nation. Change a nation, and you can change a world. Not all at once, and not by ourselves, and not without the movement of God's Spirit, and not without spiritual warfare, but not without a great turning to God. But it can happen. It is the only way it will. The change we seek must start with us. The world can ignore our arguments, but it cannot ignore a godly example. There's no answer for a life or a family transformed by God's Spirit. What happens when we live like that? We will shine like stars. People will see the way we live, and they will notice the difference. The light of Christ will be seen in us, and they will ask us the reason for the way we live, and we can share the word of life with them. We will hold forth the word of life, and we will shine like stars. And then I will live for others. Then I can boast in the day of Christ that I didn't run in vain or of labor for nothing. But even if I am poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. In the same way, you should always rejoice and share your joy with me. We must learn to live for others and not ourselves. Paul explains it in 2 key phrases. First, he says he looks forward to boasting about the Philippians when Christ returns. Paul envisions a day when he will stand before the Lord Jesus and give an account of his ministry. In the day he plans to boast about what the Philippians had done for their own generation. What will you boast about when you stand before the Lord? Your job? Your big bank account? A new house? A new car? All the important people you know? Do you think that will impress Jesus? I don't think so. In that day, the only thing that will matter is the impact you had on others for the cause of Christ. Everything else will fade away. God's going to want to know one answer. What did you do with my son? Paul also says that he's being poured out as a drink offering on their behalf. This refers to the Old Testament practice of pouring wine on top of an animal sacrifice, so the heat of the fire immediately vaporizes the wine, turning into a beautiful aroma. He is saying, even if I end up losing my life for you, it won't matter to me as long as you live for Christ. And with that statement, we come to the bottom line in Christian service. I wonder how many of us can truly say that it doesn't matter whether we live or die, so long as the people we know follow the Lord. In Nigeria, there is a cemetery. There's a little place called Kirk Chapel. It's a quiet place, an oasis, a place to meet God. Behind it is a missionary graveyard. It contains about 60 graves of men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of the gospel. Half or more of the graves are merely children, most of them dying in the first few days of weeks of life. Early in the part of the 20th century, life expectancy for missionaries in Africa was 8 years. There's a man's grave there, and the date's 1919 to 1953. The marker reads, placed in loving memory by his wife and children. Underneath are 2 words, abundantly satisfied. One inscription for one young girl reads, she is with her best friend and Lord Jesus Christ. The graveyard in Marengo sends this message. God's grace is free, but it's never cheap. The missionaries and their children buried there bear testimony to the high cost of the Great Commission. Reaching the world has never been easy, and Jesus knew that it wouldn't be. That's why he said, you will have suffering in this world. It's always been true from day one. They killed the prophets, they killed the apostles one by one, except for John, who died in exile in Patmos. Many centuries ago, Tertullian declared, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Wherever the church has gone, the cost of a new field has always been paid in blood. I saw a marker in Marengo of a little child who died many years ago. The inscription reads something like this: we plant this seed in the hope that it will one day bear a harvest of souls for the kingdom. Hebrews 11:35-38, and its list of believers who suffered for their faith. Others were tortured and refused to be released. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were sawed in two, and they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. And the world was not worthy of them. Does it seem like too much? Does it seem like the price is too high to pay? Before you answer, remember that God did when he sent his son into this world. Think of what it cost him to provide salvation to a human race that had turned against him. God also buried his son on the mission field. You are the light of the world. You shine like stars in the world. The world has its stars and God has his. God help us to shine like stars so that others may see Jesus in us. Find joy in the chaos by being the kind of star God calls you to be. To live out your faith. Live your life so the world is not worthy of you. Make it your mission to lead others to Christ, to redeem lost, to love the hurting, to minister to the needy. And what God calls you to do, you do. Let's close in prayer. Father, help me, help us to shine like stars. Your kind of stars, not the world's idea of what a star is. I'm not interested in the phony or the hypocrites or the whitewashed tombs. Wherever you lead, I'll go.